Okay. How about what works? We touched on this a little bit just a second ago. But what works in comics that doesn't work in movies, and vice versa? Are there strengths in each of them?
I guess it goes constantly. Movies move at the director's discretion, and as was said, you can do a boo in a movie because it suddenly comes out of nowhere. You can do things of that sort. What you can do in comics, you can't do a surprise of that sort, but what you can do is slow down time. You do that by adding an awful lot of panels that show incremental shifts in movement. You can angle scenes in ways that will heighten the tension of a scene, which you can't always do in a movie because that would require editing even faster than Michael Bay's capable of doing. But every panel can be getting into it closer and closer and into the eye and into, you know, every little thing, because we can segment time in a comic book. You can split 1 second into 2 pages if you felt like. We are in control of the vertical and the horizontal in many ways, literally. That's the ways that you play with comics. You can also do a lot more internal monologue because most film does not do a lot of first-person narrative or voiceover. It's just not something that is looked upon, you know, in favorably in film. But you can do that in a comic book, so you could really get into that. It's what, I forget, somebody here mentioned it, every medium is completely different, and it's not that one is better and one's not. Frankly, the sound that you get out of a movie will add that incredible difference to it. But I think what comics can do, because this is about doing horror comics, is really controlling how fast the pacing is and to dissect that moment into the smallest parts possible, because that can't be done visually in any other medium. And that's 100% unique to comics.
All I would say, sort of piggybacking on that, is from personal experience, after Freddy vs. Jason, we had set up, the original plan for the sequel was Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash with Bruce Campbell's character from Evil Dead. And so we went along, we did that treatment, and I think did a 30-some page treatment, and ended up getting online. And we spent 2 years trying to get that deal done. And as is the nature of Hollywood deal making, these things sometimes they don't make. And what comics allows, which is just an incredible thing, and by the way, something we're starting to see ripple into movies, is that anything is really possible. And if he, wow, okay, that's a little frightening. Anything is truly possible, and that there is no budget limitation. Okay, the writer's imagination and the artist's skill is your budget limitation. And at the end of the day, you know, we could get away with things that, you know, something that the fan base clearly wanted at least to see sampled in some form, which would never work in that film form. Now we could achieve in that space, pardon me, it can't take me anywhere, and ultimately have it satisfy fans so we could basically, in a strange sense, with the theatrical films now all being remade, we sort of have control of the original continuity. And that is a pretty cool thing if you're a fan of those franchises. And again, that's one of the great sort of majestic and wonderful things about this medium.
Yeah, I mean, definitely for me, it's about, in horror comics compared to horror films, it's all about pacing. Like was said, I mean, in a comic you can stretch something out over time for a while, and with a film you have an hour and a half to 2 hours to get something across, so it's a lot difficult. And that's one of the reasons why I enjoy horror comics more in most times than films, because I get to spend more time with the characters and really enjoy what they're going through and what they're dealing with, and other than a movie where it's, you know, most of the time all about who dies and how quickly they die. And so yeah, that's why I enjoy my horror comics for sure.
Yeah, just to add to that, you know, it's like basically for any story to work, you have to like the characters, you have to care about the characters. It doesn't matter what the genre is. If you're not invested in the characters, you know, what's the point of going, you know, for the ride? And one of the things that's difficult if you watch, like, you know, I love all the slasher movies, all the Friday the 13th, the Halloweens, the Freddy movies, but if you think back to all the kids, the teenagers in all those movies, they're not really like memorable. You remember the villains. You don't really care so much about the kids, you know, that die in those films. They're just two-dimensional.
And the ones that you did like are the ones that keep coming back and end up surviving. That's why
Right.
Nancy Thompson and Tommy
Yeah,
Jarvis survived.
Tommy Jarvis. You know, so in a comic, you know, it's like if you think about like the Spider-Man comics, the reason why Peter Parker's so great is you know everything that he's feeling at every minute. You know, he feels guilty about not visiting Aunt May. You so identify with him and his emotions that then if you know you threw him in a horror story, if something horrible happened to him, you already relate to him, and then you're going to really feel it. So you have the advantage of, you know, like you were saying, you're in their heads in a comic. You know, you have that ability to really get. It's kind of a shortcut, but you can kind of get people to relate, you know, to these characters in a way that you can't in a movie, especially in that short time. You know.
And then on the other hand, something that film totally has over comics is you can spend $2 million advertising a movie. And if you spend that much on a comic, you're going to be screwed. So that's one nice thing about that film has over comics. And then one thing I was thinking about that comics have over movies is we can do all kinds of stupid-ass crossover or awesome crossovers because we're not so limited with rights and legalities that would come from, you know, some actor demanding. You know, it's like we got Aliens vs. Predator done in comics like 15 damn years ago, and it took them, you know, 3 years to make some terrible movies, and you know, but we can do that, and I can, you know, as doing hack slash, I can just be like, hey, I want to use Chucky, and I can do that, and I think, you know, that's a huge advantage, and you know, comics are built upon that ease and ability to, you know, I can make this in a month, it's no big deal, instead of, you know, $2 million to advertise and $30 million to try to put together, you know, Michael versus Pinhead, which will never happen, which would be awesome. But, you know, so there you go.
Yeah, I mean, in the Hollywood system, obviously, you're, you know, limited by, you know, the marketplace and the studio and politics and the money and the budget and yeah, Tim can draw whatever he wants anytime. But I think, you know, comics and films have both been learning from each other, and comics are getting a lot more cinematic and, you know, and obviously all the comic book adaptations, but films have, you know, can learn a lot from comics and just the economy of you know, the 22 pages that you have to tell a story in and how tight you have to make it. And so I think, you know, screenwriters and editors can learn a lot from, you know, the comics and just how, you know, quickly and tightly you can tell a story. I mean, it's so many of the big comic book movies take, you know, almost the whole movie to do the origin story, and I've always loved it that, you know, whether it was, you know, Detective Comics number 27 or something telling the Batman story in like a page or two, or, you know, Peter Parker getting bit by a spider in just one page. I mean, I wish that's the way movies started to move. And I think people are so, you know, visually literate and comic literate that people are ready to go faster and farther now and just get to the good stuff. And so, yeah. Oh, and Howard the Duck does work in comics. Yeah. But does, yeah.
And George Lucas can tell you that. Yeah, it does not work.